Gerard, thank you so much for being my very first guest on the podcast.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
We'll kick it off with our first question that we ask everyone. What piece of creative art work changed your life and why?
The one that was most impactful, I think, in a lot of contexts was actually we were to make a documentary in the prison system in South Australia.
Wow.
In a mix of the men's prison and the women's prison, so Northfield prison complex. And the day before we were to shoot, and we'd scripted it and we'd worked out who would be in this documentary. And the day before there was some issue in the media, which meant they weren't allowed to use any serving prisoners.
Oh.
So suddenly we didn't have anyone that could talk on camera.
Oh no.
Yeah. So,
spanner in the works.
And overnight, I sort of thought about this idea where the camera would be POV, and I was shooting it. I was shooting on Betacam in that era. And the camera would be POV, a prisoner coming into the system, and go throughout the whole system from incarceration. So you'd be picked up and put in a van, and you're put in the back of the van, and it wasn't particularly clean, that one.
Yeah.
And then you're then taken to the watch house, and then from the watch house and you go through the whole system, and then you go to the courts eventually. But we did it in a sequential order so that they could really show people, and really it was a product. We were making documentaries in a variety of ways, but this worked out so well because a lot of prisoners who were actually serving at that time, who were on these pre-release programs, would go into the community and talk to a variety of people at community about what it was like to be incarcerated and their experiences in the prison system, in the correctional system. And so that became something that they could actually, like the viewer was taken on that journey.
And so the reason it was so, I guess, poignant as an experience was because you were learning about how to, I guess, pivot on your feet, and then the business decisions after that as well?
That was the moment when I also learnt about like really innovating. And I was good at shooting material from, dynamic environments like protests and various other things. So, and I like that. And I like the immediacy, and I'm quite reactive and can really capture a lot of material that we can use later on. They were hard yards, but they were really important. And also the things that don't work out are so important as well. Like that's, I think, such a remarkable experience to have something that you at the time think, wow, that has just like absolutely devastated the trajectory that I was on.
Yes. And
now I've got to do something different. Now I've got to start again, But really for that, in the entrepreneurial context, that's a redirection of resources, and that's a really important moment.
Okay, so I'm going to pick your brain a lot in this episode because I think you have obviously really fantastic ideas, but also you've taught this stuff for many years now. Why do you think creatives in a general sense are traditionally bad at the business side of their career?
Well, except for the ones that are really good and they make a lot of money.
Yeah, like the 1%, yeah.
That's a very important area to examine. And I say that people are successful. In any industry, you'll get a very small percentage of people who are exceptionally, successful monetarily. That's another really important point. And I think that sometimes we look at those people and we think that's
the norm.
That's the norm. That's what everyone can be, and that's what we can achieve. What I always say is that we will never be that person. We can't be that person. They have their own journey. They've got their own skills and experiences, and they may have formulated their teams in a very different way, and they may leverage really well. They may be excellent in one aspect of business, and they supplement it with others who are exceptional in other areas, and they are
outsourcing.
Outsourcing, and but also they may, in early stages, partner. They may realize their limitations and partner with someone who's quite complementary. The point with that though is it's a long. It was said once, it's a bit like a marriage, like it's in the context of marriage, if that's an option, I suppose, in a way, but just using it as simile, it's like a marriage because, you're sort of going through all of these incredibly testing times together. And, it can become quite intimate in the ways that you need to operate in that system.
You're talking about like a partnership, like a creative partnership.
Creative partnership. I mean, it can be intimate in the context of, and I'm using that marriage analogy, intimate in the ways that you may lose your temper with someone else. Like in those, I'm thinking of those.
Under stress, or you have to call them at 2 a.m., for example, your documentary story where you all of a sudden had to change everything on a dime. Like that's really stressful.
Just to caveat that intimacy, when I'm talking about that, that's not necessarily someone that you're involved with in other contexts, but it's in the business context. I think there needs to be a trust that develops, and that's what I talk about with regard to the ways that humans come together on these problems, and they start to trust each other. And that, I think, is what I mean in terms of that intimacy. Like you can trust that person.
What about for like individuals though? Like, why do you think? You know how you hear a lot about like starving artists, or like creatives are terrible with money, or like those kind of generalizations. I mean, is that your experience? Because you've taught creative people, you've been around lots of creative people, you are a creative as well. Why do you think we tend to lack those skills or shy away from them?
In terms of building business? Business skills?
And handling money and like marketing yourself, like all the kind of stuff you'd learn in an MBA, right? Why are creatives not so good at that?
This is not only particular to creatives, because I've seen it happen, but I mean, just to say, people who invent things and are experimental and innovators are creative. You know? So like I would suggest that the creativity is very, very broad in all the ways that it works. Often people, and I've done research as well that sort of looks into some aspects of this, but people often don't want to know that their idea is not going to be successful.
Oh yeah.
And so therefore, if I keep developing it and I keep putting money into it and I'm not putting it in a business context and looking at the reality of it and maybe having to stop what I'm doing, I think that can be a way as well that people sometimes
hold on to false hope.
Hold on to something that could be very successful a year, 2 years in the future, or it's been successful enough in the context that it is, and you use that knowledge to then progress to other things. Because what I would say is that all of these ideas and these creative movements that we make as individuals and also as team members as well, because, ultimately, I mean, thinking about the screen context, you're operating in teams. So
collaborating.
I'll refer to that, but I've seen it in a lot of other areas as well. But you're so often in that context creating something, and that creation is incredibly valuable. It may not result in an audience connection. It may not result in anything other than you've worked on this creative piece, but that you're building up skills and experience in that. What I would say to the marketability is this is just determining what you want to do, because is the motivation to have a creative lifestyle, and are you wanting to seek support and remuneration from that in order to survive, or are you going to do that and then have something else that brings in the sustenance of life, in terms of money?
I love that. It's kind of like art for yourself, isn't it? And just deciding on what that is, the end goal, if you're going to, try to build a business out of this thing, or if it's just for you and you don't need to find an audience, or you don't need to make money from it, or X, Y, Z. I
think that at certain stages you will, anyone can have that conversation with themselves, or, like those thoughts. And I think when I do, and I've articulated this in other contexts, but thinking about the way that you think is really important. And it seems like it's a paradox or an oxymoron. It's really important because that's part of your creative process as well. Your creative practice, your professional practice will have patterns to it. So what are you doing in the terms of how do you nurture your creativity? Do you listen to music sometimes? And then do you listen to a lot of music? Sometimes people would listen to the one song over and over and over again, because there's something in that then gives them that creative spark, sustenance, or like something that doesn't actually sort of fit quite rightly, and you're trying to sort of work that out. So I think holistically we need to really be developing those qualities, and we develop them through our lives.
And awareness, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so you and I met as you were teaching leadership and business at the film school, which when I went through, it was somewhat of a new course. It was only like 6 or 7 years in, right? I think. Why do you think that it's not usually an area that creative people start with? They kind of end up there, or it's in tandem, but people don't start with business and then move into creativity? Some
people are I've met people who are very business focused, that's where they want to begin. And so if you're beginning in business, then it would make sense that you're building up quite quickly the structures around finances and a whole range of other things. But with the creative journey, I think that people can come at that from lots of different angles, and actions as well. And I mean, just to that point, I started to teach creative and innovation many years ago. That was probably I taught media, and then I taught creative and innovation for an entrepreneurship master's and undergraduate as well, actually. Yeah. And people would come to me and they would say, I'm not creative, and I would say, okay, well, let's think about that.
Yeah.
And they would do the best. They would have the most growth in the course. Yeah. I wrote a book a couple of years ago, and I did put something in about that, which was those people I knew when they would come up and they would make that disclosure, and they'd always do it usually in private after the class.
Yeah.
And they felt very, concerned about the fact they were doing this unit and they weren't creative. I knew that they would do very well, but I would also now encourage them to examine how they are making creative decisions every day of their life. We're intrinsically creative, and we can enhance that creativity. But to your point, which is, if you're making something which is creative work, and maybe it's a filmic work, or it's
a product or whatever.
It could be a written work. It could be, people, in this era have the opportunity, but it's not just this era, to write and publish, which is remarkable, like in so many different contexts.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question is, what do you think would happen if all art schools made it a priority to really go deep with business topics, i.e., finance, like really drilling down into it, marketing, personal finance even, like your own money management, and also business skills? What do you think would happen if art schools made it like 50-50?
Look, the minute you said that, I just envisaged someone who articulated in one of my classes, I won't say where or who, but that they didn't care about money, and they were quite expletive about it.
Okay.
Right? They didn't care about money, and anyway, again, this student, and I think of the person now, did remarkably well.
Oh,
So,
great.
So even though there's this pushback, sometimes it's for a reason. I think that some people, there is an idea that this financial literacy is in some ways onerous. It's difficult. People do it on spreadsheets. It's related to markets. It's related to investment and returns and a whole range of other things that seem as though that's, when you're a child, that's the things that parents do, and it's sort of a bit distant and potentially very disinteresting,
Or overwhelming as well.
Overwhelming, yeah. And you don't have a context to it. So this is another thing that and this is something to go back before the art school idea or the film school idea, is that, our children taught financial literacy so that it's interesting and, and it's
relatable
and it's relatable
fun.
And exciting. And there was a fantastic interview. You may have had exposure to this in the context of the studies that we did. He's really the generator of the modern podcast in the context of This American Life.
Okay.
Ira is his name though. But anyway, he's been interviewed by someone who's gone off and created their own podcast series, and that's been fantastic. But he says that he talks about, in the context of the United States with the public broadcasting service, PBS, you had to do these pledge drives. And he makes this point in this interview that he's having with someone who worked for him for a number of years and then is now interviewing him. He says, there's nothing greater than being, and really, he uses the word macho, which I think is a dated term in a way, but in other contexts, probably North American in a way, in that vernacular, in that era. But people may understand what that means. But he's saying that it's a very successful and powerful thing to do a really successful pledge drive that's creative, because people typically would donate to these PBS, and there would be very few people that would subscribe or make donations.
Wait, so what's a pledge drive?
Pledge drive is, he would go on a pledge drive to try and get subscribers or people who are consuming the media, or whether it's radio or television.
Okay, so like customers, sort of.
Customers, yeah. But it's almost considered to be a bit like a charity, like you're supporting your local television station.
Got it. Okay.
And there would be, there's hundreds of PBS television stations in the US.
Yes.
But there's also, as I understand it, what he was explaining anyway, that there's a radio equivalent that he would be doing these pledge drives.
Yeah.
He was saying the first thing you need to do, he said you can't just create for the sake of creating, in his view, right? Now that is not what I'm saying earlier, but in his view, it was like you can't, and I suppose this is in a commercial context as well.
Okay.
You can't just think that someone's going to give you a whole lot of money to create your vision.
Yeah,
right?
what a great thing.
Yeah,
if that happened.
That's wonderful. How much do you want?
Yeah.
He's saying you've got to sort of earn that, and you do it through these creative ways that you can make money. And so what he would do is he would have a whole range of very interesting ways to connect with the audience. And he said next thing, he'd gone from no one ringing back to the whole switchboards being lit up with people responding to what he had created in terms of a pledge drive, which typically no one ever wanted to do because they were just onerous and they didn't really feel that they needed to do them. But what his ambition was that he wanted producers to come to him and say, we want your show because we know it's going to make money.
Yeah, the demand, creating that demand.
And so that's what he did. And he really sort of flipped he inverted that. He became innovative with ways to make money in a context which was in a way public radio.
Okay, so our core listener, or really who I'm hoping will tune into this information, is the creative or the freelancer. So the individual who, creates. If I'm someone who is interested in the arts, entertainment, or creating, how can I find something to build? Where do I start? And I know this is something that you teach. How do you kind of figure out what's the thing that's going to, I guess, be of commercial value?
There's a reasonable amount of, I think, pre-planning that has to go into learning and research. Whether it's secondary research, we would say like things that are existent in the market. You find out what's existent. You're looking for those gaps. But I think that what I would suggest is niche is incredibly important in the context of, especially in a global market, being able to find a defined market that has a boundary, in a way. With globalization, since the 1980s, especially, globalization has been really, I would argue around for centuries, millennia, but in the recent era, what we understand as globalization, there's often not very well-defined boundaries, and yet these are global markets. They're incredible. But say, for instance, someone has an interest, and I think about something like collecting.
Okay.
So say someone collects electric model trains, of a particular era, because you can have a lot of different varieties and people can collect them in certain ways. They might collect an era or vintage or whatever. They have intrinsic value. They have a sort of antique classical value as well. But there's a defined market. You can work out who that is. I had a colleague who worked in radio and still works in radio and would talk about the customer that he was, and he got a magazine or someone gave him a picture of a person, and this was a female person, and it would be the person, female person at home with children in some context, but that's the one that he was looking at.
Yeah.
He was thinking that they didn't have much time, but they're listening to the radio, and he created that, and he said he put that photograph up there so that whenever he's doing, he's always talking to that person. So he's identified who his audience is. Now that was after a lot of research.
Okay.
So he'd worked out that. But what I would say is that the other point is that, you prototype, you trial things, right? So you do this rapid prototyping. You can prototype in lots of different ways. You can prototype on paper. You can do paper prototypes.
And talk me through what's a prototype process?
So say you're creating a product. What you would typically do is you would go through the research phase.
Yeah.
And I utilize, elements of design thinking. These are concepts that have come up that have been developed, from Stanford University, from IDEO. The UK Council has developed some wonderful UK double diamond in terms of design thinking. But it's really the principles that I think are important. That's what I'll talk to you now. But essentially, you do the research. With the research, you then so you do some secondary research and a little bit of primary research. Primary research, you might interview 5 people that you know. 5 people you may work with. You ask them a number of questions. You're looking for things that they do in their routines that present some form of pattern. And then you're looking for the people who don't do that. You want the outriders as well. So you want a bit of variation there. And you want to then just think about it. And then you're really looking to identify a problem, or a need. And, we would have spoken about this before. Need is very strong, but people can have very strong wants or desires, you know. A need, if shelter, food, water, you're supplying that, you're giving someone sustenance, life sustenance. So it's a very important element of that sort of Maslow's taxonomy, that triangle that people may be familiar with. So that's one aspect of it. But what you're doing, say, you interview 5 people and you find out, they all play video games, but they all play it in a little bit of a different way. And then there's one person who doesn't play video games. And then there's another one that does something completely different. You may be looking at the routine and the behaviors of the people that are doing the video game playing and find out that they were actually consuming hours and hours of content, of visual content, especially those open worlds, So when you looked at the gaming part, it actually sort of really was much greater than, say, the cinematic part, which was now in that change and that flux, And people were interested and drawn to the cinematic part because, it's spectacle as well. And I would also suggest, this is another really important thing to realize, that these things don't just happen. People create them. They create the structures for them. They get the finances in place.
Yeah.
They organize it financially. They also create an event. Like people may have different understandings of the American Academy Awards that take place, annually. But that's really, and has been for decades now, that's creating an event. It's like, I want your attention. Let's bring in people that are going to draw your attention, people like these, people that they know from the cinema, in the classical era. So they would have them and they would bring them in and they're attracting you to that environment, but they're really creating the mechanism to then get you back and make more product and more money. So that's another thing when we're thinking about the content that we make, is that it should be part of a greater plan. Like we understand our market, we do our research. If we need to, we do secondary research. We find out what's already there. If people are doing one thing, and I've had this a lot, people will come and say, "But I just found out that it's already been done. My idea is already being done."
Yeah,
you can actually just change it a few degrees. Like it might be done in one context. Is it done in another? The fact that you now know that may give you a lot of information to now do something very, very.
Yes. And actually, specific. I think it's good to have comparisons because it makes it easier for people to understand what you're trying to build, like having a reference. So it's not a bad thing.
Not at all. No.
That there's a competitor already.
No, this is another thing. And there's, we would have spoken about blue ocean strategy. You sometimes want to you want to know where your competitors are. You want to know where there are very substantial competitors. And I mean, you would look at the Hollywood studio system, in the historic era and the contemporary era to a large extent, and think that really is what we would call a congested, or in its more extreme, potentially a hostile market to an entrant. So you're not going to be able to compete in that arena without a lot of money.
Yes,
right?
I was going to say, can you explain what blue ocean means?
Yeah. So Kim and Mauborgne were academics, and they wrote an HBR article, which is used a lot in the business, especially the North American business context. And they decided on this particular strategy. And it was a marketing strategy, really. And it was saying that they're in the red ocean, that's where all the competitors are, and they likened it to an ocean that was full of sharks. Right? Okay. So to be graphic, the red in the water is,
bloody.
So you don't want to be there. You want to be in the blue ocean where there isn't that competition. There isn't the red in the waters. The oceans are blue, and blue ocean strategy is a good way to conceptualize markets.
Yeah. It's also tricky though, because if it's blue ocean, you really have to educate your market first because there's no other already.
Okay, that is a very, very good point, because I use automotive industry quite a lot.
Man, my show notes are going to be so long with all of these references.
Henry Ford said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would tell me, I want a faster horse.
Yes.
Now, he did give them a faster horse, and they have horsepower in the engines.
Yeah.
But people didn't conceptually understand that idea of, a car, right?
Yeah.
In the automotive. And also there weren't roads in that context. Yep. There were lots of different variations. They looked, they operated in different ways. There weren't really sort of standards in the ways that there are now. He really innovated that space. But to your point now, if we follow the design thinking format that I explained earlier, if you do that by rote, you'll get to this end point, and what you'll have done is, because you've spoken to people in the audience, you've worked out what they want, you'll create something that aligns to something that they probably already know, right?
Yeah.
So that's the limitation with design thinking. With blue ocean strategy, you do have to define something new in the market, and people may not know that they want that yet.
That's right.
So
like Steve Jobs, right?
And his vision was clear, you know, like, and this is another thing. His vision was defined. A personal computer in everyone's house, when people didn't even have a concept what I would suggest in the mainstream what a personal computer was. Computers filled big rooms at IBM, you know, and businesses had them, you know, if they were lucky, you know. So I agree with that. But there's another thing with blue ocean, and I've got this from someone who established share economy. Bruce Jeffries did Go Get Cars, and he said if you create a segment, you can own the segment.
Ooh.
You know, and you'll have competitors that come in.
They will come in, yeah.
But you have established the segment.
Yeah.
You know, that's really important. And again, in his context, he created Go Get Cars because he had a need, because he thought, and Go Get Cars, you know, people may understand that in the context of
like cars.
Share economy, right? Share ride.
Yeah. So just on that, what advice would you have for people who are looking to take something to market?
What I would say is that, and this is a great thing, right?
And it's a big question. So like
it's big.
Sorry.
And I'll try and I'll conceptualize it in a way that I hope is helpful. I believe the minute you start putting your idea forward, you are taking it to market. Right?
Yeah, you're getting feedback, right?
You're getting feedback. And I think that's what you're really wanting to be done. And people say, well, you know, someone might take my idea. And that's something that was said to me in early stages. People would say things like that. And you think, well, you know what, it may have already been done. Someone may be doing it already. What you're doing is you're trying to work out, your idea is several versions, if not more, from what it could be in the market. You know, like this is a kernel of an idea, and meeting people and talking about it with them, people who are invested in that industry, are giving you very, you know, and otherwise people outside or outriders that can be helpful as well. People that you know and trust, you know, trust is important in the early stages. But if you're talking to people in the industry, you're also getting a lot of market knowledge and feedback, and you're developing it. And I think it's really important also to reflect on the fact that sometimes things, for whatever reason, they don't work out. They may not be something that you revisit, right? And you think, well, I've wasted all that time. You know, I reflect now, and it's only in many years since a range of things happened that I thought were quite quite impactful in
a negative way.
In a negative way, insofar as the ambition that we had at the time didn't continue, right? Like it stopped because of whatever that was. But when I've reflected on that, I think actually in hindsight, they were some of the greatest moments of that trajectory. They were the things that sent me off in other ways that then was now looking at a whole range of new things, you know, like, I mean, especially when we're in industries and people are being competitive, there can sometimes be behaviors that are quite challenging, you know, in a whole range of ways. And people have different experiences of that. What I learned was that the more extreme those behaviors were, the more information and the more development that it gave me.
Totally. The more you get, the more you learn. Like as painful as that is, but like you really get a lot out of it.
It's incredibly confronting, painful, and a whole range of other things. But, you know, it's in those uncomfortable times and era that we learn so much. You know, we're not in our comfort zone with everything going right. We're in another zone. And not to say that we want to be in discomfort.
All the time.
All the time. We need to look after ourselves and have well-being and care for ourselves. And I think that's important. And we don't want to be in
But that's where growth happens, right? When you're uncomfortable.
It does. I mean, that you do need to move out of that sort of comfort area. And then there's the discomfort, and then there's the learning era, and then you sort of have a maturity later on. The other point with that is you don't want to be in a psychologically unsafe environment. So, you know, part of the business training that, you know, that we get exposed to is that, you know, we're increasingly aware of the impact that people's behaviours can have on other people.
Really?
And
oh my gosh, I feel like it's going the other way. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. Let's go back to another question.
Another time.
Yeah. So really quickly, what identifiers are there for if you've got something that could work? Like what are the kind of the early signs? How do I know if my idea is any good?
You test it.
Yeah.
You know, you've ultimately got to test it.
But what's the kind of sign?
The process and testing. It depends. You can, I mean, I think in the entrepreneurial context, and I think this is why we do talk about design thinking quite a lot in that way, is that you create low-fi versions, okay? So low fidelity versions, right? Things that don't cost you anything in terms of, financial outlay.
Yep.
It's conceptual stuff, and you can do a lot of really good work with the conceptual stuff, and you're beginning to get feedback and understand if that's working or not.
Yeah.
What I would say about that early era as well is that you're getting several versions of what could be as well, because you're really thinking, whatever my original idea was, that's not what's going to be at the end, but it's got to go through these several stages, right? These several iterations. So, and you're wanting to get that information from people at that time to then modify it into something that will ultimately be successful in I would suggest that mass market is success. Like when something is mass market and it works for people. You know? I mean, there was something I listened to quite recently that was really quite interesting, talking about, great things like virtual reality, augmented, and they have their place, right?
Yeah.
But when you get something like, generative AI, which has been around for decades, but it comes into a package in this era and people can use it.
Yeah.
Then it goes mass market.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So even you have a low fidelity version, you have a high fidelity version as well, ultimately.
Yes.
And that's when you put the money into it.
Yeah.
But just noting that our time is our most valuable resource. Do you know what I mean? So
definitely.
choose what you're wanting to put that time into.
To invest that into.
And what gives you the greatest return in terms of your development, but also your growth and a whole range of other things. We also have a trajectory in our lives.
Okay, so 2 more questions. How long does it take? I know that's like, how long is a piece of string? You've probably been a witness to a few ideas in action. Can you mention some examples that you've seen from idea to fully fledged? Maybe just one.
I mean, I think about Game of Thrones, right? So you've got the overarching, you've got the overarching story idea, but you've got all these sort of like these sub-arches, and these there's a word for it, and it escapes me at the moment. So you've got these sort of subsections to it. And so you've got a range of those. I think that a lot of the stuff that we do in the everyday, and we're running projects, sometimes when I was at the height of running projects, we might have 20 projects, if not more, and we'd be running them at different stages, and one would absolutely take off, and you think, okay, this is the one. And you get a lot of market interest, you get people investing in it. It's shown to the executives, they all like it. And then suddenly it just stops, And for some people it can be devastating, I don't know why, but I never used to affect me in that way. I knew that it was really impactful, but I just thought, I don't know, I was optimistic about something else happening, and something always would. And it wasn't necessarily that pathway either. It would be sometimes something quite different that came off that. I would suggest we need to also define how we see something being successful,
That's a good mindset too, like something will come from this.
Yeah.
I like it.
What and how do we understand success? For some people, success is money. For some people, success is their networks, their families, their environment, their well-being. If we don't have our health, suddenly our health is our most valuable perspective,
So what is your creative outlet?
I consume a lot of information, right? And I consume it in the context of written. I read quite a bit, but I learnt to read quite fast when I was in my late teens. And so I read in that way, and I have even this morning I was looking, I've got like about 7 books that I'm
on the go,
like on my coffee table, and I'm just sort of going, okay. And I don't use my coffee table really, except to put these books and think, okay, I've got to get back to that one.
Yeah.
So reading is really important. I like a lot of listening to things. So podcasts, when there's a really good one and you can really delve into it, that's fantastic. Audiobooks I think are fantastic as well. I like contemporary materials as well. I don't go for a lot of opinion. I don't like people's opinion necessarily as being reliable information for me. That's not everyone. That's just me. I like it if it's evidentially based. Yeah. If they've got evidence and they've got a different idea, it's a novel idea, and it tests the way I think. I really like that. I like developing my thinking, and I think that probably is the greatest thing that I like doing. But I've thoroughly also enjoyed, raising children, for instance, and like having experiences in a variety of ways through business.
Gerard, thank you so much for coming here, giving me all your pearls of wisdom, and just having a great chat about
it's been
ideas.
lovely. Thank you. Yeah. I really appreciate it.